Safe passage. It's something all parents want for their children. Hello, I'm Lydia Talbot. Welcome to Sanctuary. In this edition of Sanctuary, we look at the life and ministry of the Reverend Dr. Walter B. Johnson, Jr., an African Methodist Episcopal pastor who felt the call to organize and implement a walking school bus. Known today as Safe Passage, this landmark public safety campaign with Chicago Public Schools employs and deploys an army of vest-clad adults helping thousands of children make their way to and from school safely. Profoundly influenced by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1965 work in the Chicago fair housing struggle, Walter Johnson has devoted his life to making a faithful difference in Chicago through progressive social justice activism. His story will challenge what you think about your politics and your faith today on Sanctuary.
I am Reverend Dr. Walter B. Johnson, Jr., graduate of Chicago Theological Seminary. I serve as pastor of the historic Greater Institutional African Methodist Episcopal Church. This is now going into my 12th year. I've been in pastoral ministry for 40 years. I've been in ministry for 46 years. I grew up in Inglewood, attending Gershwin Elementary School, as well as I was attending Greater St. John African Methodist Episcopal Church. And at the time of what I believe my calling, I was very much influenced by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. No one else in my family had been a minister or even actively involved in a capacity of officer or otherwise in the church. And so I was in 6th grade when I gave my first public speech at my school, Gershwin. From there, I was then asked by the church to give a youth day message in which I shared youth yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And I kind of challenged the congregation, even at 11 years of age, that if you do not create safe spaces and places for us as young people to participate in church now, we won't be around tomorrow. At the age of 16, I formally answered the call to preach and was licensed to preach as one of the youngest persons in the African Methodist Episcopal Church in the Chicagoland area.
I don't think that the African American community has been given the luxury to kind of separate faith and civic life. Given the challenges that the African American community has had in its history, our faith leaders have always been not just priests, but they've also been sages on the front line calling for justice. The African Methodist Episcopal Church was founded in 1787. It is the oldest denomination founded on American soil, black or white, an organization founded out of racial discrimination. Richard Allen was born in slavery in Delaware, 1760, matter of fact, February 14th, 1760. He bought his freedom from his slave owner. He was extremely gifted in preaching, and Francis Asbury, who was the person who helped to establish Methodism on American soil, was enamored with him and ordained him, allowed him to be able to preach in various places. Richard Allen ended up in Philadelphia, where he ministered at St. George Methodist Church. It was a situation that took place where the people at St. George Methodist Church decided that they wanted the persons of African descent to move to the balcony during worship. It was a practice that everyone would come in and they would kneel at the altar and pray. While the persons of African descent were praying, they were pulled up off their knees while they were praying. And the story goes that if you allow us to finish praying, you won't have to deal with us anymore. And they walked out. And from that walkout, they started Bethel AME Church. There were other churches in the area that also were dealing with discrimination as it related to the Methodists and wanted to be independent. And in 1816, they came together and they formed the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and Richard Allen was elected their first bishop. The African Methodist Episcopal Church has committed itself to issues of social justice and uplift and self-determination. It has 6,000 congregations on 5 continents. The AME Church is committed to social justice because of the plight, situation, circumstances of persons of African descent from our time here in the United States. And so during its founding, we really emerged out of a mutual aid society called the Free African Society. And that organization was committed to helping free blacks and former enslaved persons who came to the Philadelphia area to be able to be on a much more equal footing in the Philadelphia area. So they helped them with medical issues, they helped them with marriage and burial, they helped them with job training, as well as entrepreneurial development, to be able to engage in levels of self-determination.
At the age of 22, I started pastoring. So I actually was pastoring in the church before I actually ended up going to seminary. I graduated from Chicago State University because I was a first-time graduate with a grade point average of 2.43, which was really not sufficient or adequate to get into seminary. There was a gentleman by the name of Reverend Dr. Charles Spivey, who was pastor of Coppin Memorial African Methodist Episcopal Church. He thought so much of me, he wrote a letter then to Reverend Dr. Shelby Rooks, who was the president at that time, and said, I believe this young man has promised to go to seminary. And my bishop, of course, told me because I was so young, I needed to go to seminary. Chicago Theological Seminary accepted a 2.43 grade point average student. But I came in or went into CTS as a probationary student, which meant the first quarter I had to get a B or better grade point average. And so I was able to achieve that in my first quarter. And of course, I went on to continue at Chicago Theological Seminary, graduating and then also getting an MDiv, getting a DMin. And then later I was awarded an honorary doctorate for all of the work in terms of the community that I had been a part of. And one of the reasons also why I went to seminary was because I was always really touched about trying to help persons. And I felt that a formal education, I didn't want to be quote unquote a Jack Lake preacher. I wanted to make sure that I had the academic proficiency and the educational requirement and pedigree in order to go out there and serve the community as best as I could. And Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world.
Reverend Dr. Walter Johnson is both an alumnus and trustee of Chicago Theological Seminary. And he has an amazing story. He came in as a probationary student. He had to work very hard in order to move forward in the program. And it's such a powerful testimony, and he gives everybody inspiration in terms of his journey and how he has prospered and how he has developed as an individual at CTS. CTS has the long-standing history of activism. We have many firsts we have launched the Black Initiative to begin to focus more closely on the Black community. We're on the south side of Chicago. The seminary is located in Woodlawn. We are just east of Inglewood and Grand Crossing and Grand Boulevard. So we are surrounded by areas where there are challenges. And given our history of activism, certainly we are physically placed in this space to make a difference. One thing that I admire about all of my colleagues, and of course my advisor is AME, and that is the fact that they have a spirit of agency. There's this idea that there should be involvement among the members of the clergy and members of the community, and they don't operate in silos. And so there's a spirit and a history of generosity, a spirit of activism, a spirit that leads be involved in education initiatives, in social justice initiatives, and opportunities to be effective in their respective communities.
Chicago Theological Seminary formalized and helped me to become more, as I would call it, a professional in terms of ministry, because I was so young. Most of the persons who were in my class, they were all second career individuals, and I would always kid them and tell them I never had a chance to do a second career, first career, anything, because I was always a student, and in some instances I was pastoring when I got to seminary versus those who were already second career individuals who had been called into ministry. And so I was already very much doing things as a young person because I believe about community activism, and really, to be candid about it, I also was, I guess, how can I best describe it? I was following in the footsteps, so I thought, of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because I had read a lot of things. I tried to emulate him and example him.
And so today we are struggling for something which says we demand genuine equality. It's not merely a struggle against extremist behavior toward Negroes. And I'm convinced that many of the very people who supported us in the struggle in the South are not willing to go all the way now. I came to see this in a very difficult and painful way in Chicago over the last year where I've lived and worked. Some of the people who came quickly to march with us in Selma and Birmingham were active around Chicago. And I came to see that so many people who supported morally and even financially what we were doing in Birmingham and Selma were really outraged against the extremist behavior of Bull Connor and Jim Clark toward Negroes, rather than believing in genuine equality for Negroes.
An indelible mark was left on me in 1968. I was 11 years of age, and I remember it was like yesterday on 63rd and Troop Street. After Dr. Martin Luther King got killed, there was rioting in Chicago, and the police literally was an occupied force on the south side, on the west side. I remember my dad taking me down 63rd Street and saying, looking on the signs on the windows of various business establishments, soul brother, soul sister, whatever it is, but persons trying to at least acknowledge and let folk know, please don't destroy my place. I am part of this community. I remember that. I remember growing up going to what we referred to as Chicago Public Schools at that time as Willis wagons, where there were mobile units where it was so much overcrowding and kids were not even allowed to go into schools. We would put in mobile units. And so those kind of things really impacted me, and I always felt a calling to social justice. Back in 1998, I was assigned to pastor Wayman AME Church, or Wayman African Methodist Episcopal Church, located in that particular period of time and era known as Cabrini Green. Some of my friends, when I told them that I was going to Cabrini Green, they said, man, I'm not coming over there to visit you. People get shot over there. a lot of gang warfare in the area because they just were not safe. If you do not create safe spaces and places for us as young people, we won't be around tomorrow. And I felt that we need to get involved with our young people, with Chicago Public School students. I founded the Alliance for Community Peace as a walking school bus, which is now called or part of the Safe Passage program by way of the Chicago Public Schools. They would walk the kids to the school, which was Jenner Academy. What the challenge was that because there was so much violence going on in the community that, you had issues with the Reds, which were the buildings, the Whites, Marshall Field Garden Apartments, and the row houses. So all these various factions, they were, having various issues. But one of the things that was I guess I want to call it universal or the uniting power was the faith community and the work that we did. I was not scared, even though folk was, like, Pastor, you can't do that. I was not scared to go up into the developments and talk with some of the gangbangers because I believe that's what we're called to do. One of the things that I did not realize initially was some of the kids, they were buying box cutters. They were different colors because this was a whole gang thing. So, some had red, some had white, yellow, whatever the case may be. But the establishments at that time in Cabrini were selling these things, unbeknownst to me, to the kids in the area. And I'm getting calls from the schools in the area saying these kids are cutting each other, cutting hair, cutting themselves, whatever the case may be. So what I did was I called Father Flager, Michael Flager, who is right down from me now. And I said, how do I respond to this whole thing? And he said, well, Walter, what I'd encourage you to do is go over there and buy up all the box cutters. So I took the 18th District Police Department with me, and I went over there and was 2 establishments that were selling box cutters. I bought them all up. It's still located in Wayman AME Church down in the lower level. Huge boxes of box cutters because my thing was I need to be able to stem this whole situation. Work with Father Flager also. We were one of the forerunners as relates to the gun buyback program. Initially, we were doing that. I was going out asking establishments, businesses to be able to give donations to be able to buy back some guns. And then after that, Mayor Daley then formalized and concretized the program as part of the budget for CPD. But Father Flager and I were the first ones that kind of started doing the gun buyback program for Chicago. But I came to realize and recognize and acknowledge that persons who are over there living in that community or even certain other communities, they're people. They want the same things as other persons want. And so when I was assigned there as the pastor, there are 2 incidents that I believe shaped my ministry. One incident had to do with Dantrell Davis. He was on his way to school, crossing a park with his mom, and some gangbangers shot from the high rises and killed this young man. The second incident was that there was a young lady who was raped and molested in a building right behind the church where I pastored Wayman. They referred to her as Girl X. And so those 2 incidents kind of propelled me to do what I'm doing now.
We're doing all we can to make sure that our schools are safe. So we take steps to make sure that our schools are secure. We get on any given day, there's 200,000 children in after-school programs, off the street, engaged in after-school programs. This summer, the mayor will have 250,000 children throughout the Chicago area involved in school-based and park-based and library-based programs, activities.
Paul Ballas, who was CEO of Chicago Public Schools at that time, was concerned about the levels of violence that was happening in and around various developments in the Chicagoland area. So he came to me, because I was involved again in community, and said, we need the clergy to get involved with our young people, with Chicago Public School students, because they just weren't, not safe. I took the paper that I wrote, What Shall I Tell My Children?, where I argued and defended for the fact that we as a church community have to be more actively and proactively engaged in community to save our babies, to save our community, which meant that I believe that folk in the church got to come up out of the building. We are the church, not the physical edifice, not the structure that persons go to on Sunday, but we are the manifestation of the church as a living embodiment of what Christ's example is all about. So what I did was I took my paper as a framework and I wrote a proposal to Chicago Public Schools using the same kinds of elements that I had in the paper, where there were mentors, there were tutors, there were persons who were working with young people, etc. So what ended up happening at that point, Paul Vallis said, okay, I see that you're passionate about this thing, Walter. So let me start you all out with a grant of $89,000. Now, I was part of a larger, broader group called the Near North Ministry Alliance. So you had African Methodist, you had United Methodist, you had Baptist, you had Presbyterian, you had Quaker, you had Lutheran. All these churches came together. What happened was, because of my passion about dealing with this whole thing around violence, then they said, hey, Walter, you take it, we'll support you. So the first year that we started, we got $89,000 from Chicago Public Schools. What we did was we created what was called then a walking school bus, where we hired persons who lived in the developments. We hired individuals who were at home, as I would call it, watching Jerry Springer. We worked with the Illinois Department of Human Services to be able to create opportunities for those parents to get skill sets for employment and some other things. And then in addition to that, they were able to get a stipend for working with. So they would walk their kids to the school, which was Jenner Academy. The New York Times did an expose on this walking school bus project, and they featured me on the front page of the newspaper standing in the midst of a gangway in Cabrini Green. It morphed into after-school program. It morphed into employment opportunities. It morphed into working with parents. We now have 13 schools that we work with the staff of 135 who are doing safe passage in the mornings, in the afternoons. They get paid $13 an hour, and this is through Chicago Public Schools. And the blessing that I have gotten is that I've recognized and acknowledged and kind of somewhat fulfilled what I believe God's mandate for us to do, is to create those kinds of opportunities for individuals to be able not only to make it, but also to thrive in the midst of all of that. And then in addition to that, to be able to make sure that our babies going to and from school are safe.
My name is Jasmine Parker, and I'm with Safe Passage. Well, really, we stand out here to make sure the kids are safe and they get to school. Yesterday, there was a little girl, and she came out and said that no one was home, so she was dropped off at home, and she didn't know what to do, so I brought her back into the school, and we was able to contact her mom, and she came and got her, and she made it home safe.
The world needs safe passage all over the schools, public, high schools also. We just need more of them to watch our babies coming and going in the morning when they're coming and going to school.
We need safe passage because also the parents feel more relieved knowing that we are standing on the corner when their children are coming to and from school. They always tell us how, they appreciate us out here. The babies, they depend on us. The parents also depend on us. Every day I get letters also from the neighborhood saying how great of a job I does. Then we also have some kids that comes late. So for the kids that come late, we out here standing so they feel safe. They know that it's a safe passage worker out here, and their parents are able to send them knowing that they are going to be safe.
Greater Institutional African Methodist Episcopal Church was founded in 1900 by Bishop Reverend Cassius Ransom. At the time, he worked alongside Susan B. Anthony. He was very supportive of the women's suffrage movement. Then, around 1956, the Reverend Roy L. Miller then relocated institutional African Methodist Episcopal Church to this particular site, 7800 South Indiana Avenue, with the whole premise of that the church was involved in community, that the church desired to provide social services and programs for those who resided in the community. And the church still continues to do that even up until this day. So this year we celebrate our 119th year anniversary. We do a lot of outreach, work, missions work, evangelism. We go out and we bring in shelters, men's shelters, women's shelters. We provide them with clothing and toys. We also adopted as a church Ruggles Elementary right down from us because we desire to also provide coats for the youth during the winter months. So we do a lot of outreach, and again, that's off of the basis of what I would believe Bishop Reverdy Cassius Ransom would desire us to do today.
I think it's modeled in who Jesus was, and we have truly lived that out. And Walter is an outstanding model of both being a priest and sage, and political activist, and committed to not just making a difference in the spiritual uplift of people, but also in their social situations as well.
Are you a transformational leader or a church pew member? Hashtag discipleship matters. As a transformational leader and disciple, one must be willing to surrender and embrace the call to Christian discipleship. The characteristics of the caller.
I had an opportunity to be able to go to the King Center, Atlanta, Georgia, and I'd always aspired to be able to do that. And when I got there, there was kind of like, I stood at the monument where Dr. King, they had laid him, and it was kind of like an ethereal experience for me, where I was standing there and I felt something come from outside of me, went through my entire body, came back out, and the words were, and actually I felt it was Dr. King's words saying, you don't have to follow after me any longer, go ahead and create your own dream. And so that's what I've spent my life doing, trying to create my own dream, but also understanding and knowing to whom much is given, much is expected and required. But also, I believe in the adage of we are blessed to be a blessing to others. So as best as I can, I desire to give back in a variety of ways. And I believe that God has allowed me through my connections, through my relationships, and especially because of my time being at Chicago Theological Seminary, to be able to do some of the things that I believe that God called me to do.
We're glad you've been with us today for this special edition of Sanctuary on Safe Passage. Your thoughts and reactions to issues and ideas at the intersection of life and faith are important to us, and we want to hear from you. Email us at gcbm@ameritech.net, visit our website at gcbm.org, and write to us at Sanctuary in care of the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries, 77 West Washington Street, 2nd floor, Chicago 60602. That's the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries, 77 West Washington Street, Chicago 60602. I'm Lydia Talbot. Thanks for keeping faith with us today on Sanctuary. May peace be with you.
Thank you.